Hey, welcome back to the Kingsway podcast.
Welcome.
Glad you are here. Had a very excited Courtney come up to me and say she was excited to make the podcast. So just want to give a second shout out.
Now you made 2 podcasts.
Yep. We know there are lots of new listeners, and we thank you for paying attention and checking this out. We have a new one today. We're not sticking to our norms. We're going to break out of our shell.
It's one of our topical ones.
Yeah.
Still Bible topical, but also like today topical.
We like to talk about being curious and liking to learn, and we read, and we're constantly looking at new voices and people that are influences in our life. And one of John Mark Comer has become one of John Flower's influences, kind of bled into our life. And I think you are kind of an avid follower of his stuff, and I've kind of I think that's bled into my life enough where I'm starting to like take notice whenever that kind of influences in others that I care about.
We've actually, so this will be episode 174. Wow. If you've watched the videos, this will be our 75th episode with a John Mark Comer book on screen at all times.
Wow.
Right there practicing, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, a book he wrote based off something Dallas Willard said and just expounding on it. That has been surprisingly vital.
They're the whole time.
Foundational.
And so the discussion comes off of one of the things in his new book, Practicing the Way, which I highly encourage you to go and check out. It's a deep book, but it's not something that I feel like will be, it's not going to be very, academic. It's
Most of it is not meant to give you brand new ideas.
No, it's supposed to help you understand the difference between sometimes misconceptions or misversions of religion versus actually following Jesus. And part of that is the discussion we have today.
Yeah, a lot of it isn't like the Hebrew word for whatever. And you read this passage in English in your translation, but it actually means this. Most of it is like, you've read the Bible, hopefully, and you've read the New Testament, hopefully, and you've heard the call to discipleship and to be a disciple but what does that mean? And talking about a lot about how Jesus, while being fully God, was also fitting into the category of rabbi or teacher.
Yep.
And disciple has to do with that, is studying from and learning from Jesus. And so how do you be a disciple? Well, like Jesus' rules for discipleship aren't go to church, pay your tithes. Yeah, because this was a big point he made in the book that really set the foundation for me is, and I'm only halfway through it. Yeah. So let me just put that disclaimer.
No, and this is a discussion based on what a conversation we had. And we were like, we should just have this.
Yeah, we should just
podcast.
Record this. But basically, he was saying that there's a thing called a rule of life that it's existed in the church for a long time, and it's supposed to be how you live out your Christianity. And he said most churches don't have a rule of life today, like evangelical, non-denominational churches like ours. We have a rule of church life. If you want to be a good church member, which is language we may talk about in a little bit, then you pay your tithes, attend a church, you serve in a ministry at the church or whatever. And it's a ministry at the church for the church. So if you serve on the ministries that I'm in charge of, you are a part of the Sunday morning service, which is a very internal activity. The Sunday service is about the Sunday service.
Yes.
Like it is a way we're hoping to love and care for people and tend to people, but like it's not the same as taking care of the poor and the orphan and the widow. It's not the same as it's an activity for insiders by insiders. And it's as good as that can be. Well, and it's not everything.
Yeah, and I think that he makes a really good, John does in the book, Practicing the Way, makes a really good indication in one of the earlier chapters. He talks about how right now, if you are seen as someone that goes to church and believes in Jesus, you are called a Christian.
And believes the true stuff.
Yes.
Believes the correct true things.
Yes. So then he uses these statistics that are actually still pretty accurate. I looked a couple of them up, but it's like 63 to 65% of Americans call themselves Christians, but only 4% practice Christianity. And so he starts to talk about the difference between claiming Christianity and practicing Christianity. And so he even mentions that the Catholic Church has practicing Catholics versus just Catholics. So
nominal
it's like,
Catholics.
more like people that just came from Boston or Italy or just have that as more of like a
honestly,
heritage.
I feel like the place I've seen that a lot, that nomenclature, is there's a division in the
I'm sorry, what
Republican
did you just say?
nomenclature.
Yeah, that
How
is,
you come up with how you name something.
okay, cool. That is just sidebar. I didn't know if anybody else was tracking with you. I was like, did you just have a mini stroke, or is that a word?
I have big brain muscles.
Okay, big brain muscles. Come on in.
Excuse me,
Make some
coming
room
through.
for you.
I didn't think that was going to do that.
No, you're good.
But
I'm
I
tracking.
feel like a place where people talk about practicing versus just by name, a place I've heard that is a division in the Republican Party where people will call each other rhinos, Republican in name only. And this is the same idea, although I want to take that illusion no further. But this is the same idea where it's like, I don't think the acronym works the same for Christians or whatever, but like Christian in name only.
Yeah.
We believe the right stuff, we attend the right things, but the teachings and lifestyle of Jesus have not permeated our lives and our priorities.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we're going to have this discussion, and it'll probably be on the title or something like it, is discipleship is a noun, or disciple is a noun, not a verb. And I think why that struck me so well, and why it's a little tricky, and we were even talking about this, but
This is one of his many chapters in the book, by the way.
it's
John
just,
Mark.
it was one of those like foundational things. And I think because I'm a pastor, and at times people have said like, well, where am I being fed? Or like, where's your discipleship program? And one of the things he talks about is like, we don't use nouns as verbs any other way. So like, he's like, nobody's like, are you Christianing me? Like, are you followering me? You know,
Are
what I
you
mean?
believering me?
Believering me. Yeah. Like, and so the concept here is like, we've turned this idea of discipleship on the teacher rather than recognizing what discipleship is supposed to be more like apprentice.
Yeah.
Are you apprenticing?
And that's where I think disciple gets confusing, because disciple, I feel like I've seen disciple and I've learned by context clues what a disciple is from like some like religious monk looking things. I'm a disciple of this guy. Acolyte, maybe a similar word, whatever. But then a lot of other times when I hear disciple in Christian circles, it sounds like teaching or believing.
Yeah.
And those are good synonyms sometimes in certain contexts. But the way a rabbi-disciple relationship worked in Jesus' day, and the thing he calls us to still today as our rabbi, is a role model imitator.
Yeah, no, and I think the way that he breaks it down in the book that I think is a healthy way to think about it is like, if a rabbi or a teacher came and called a student to follow him, he would literally have him follow him everywhere. Like this wasn't show up to class from 9 to 5 and then go home. It was, no, you're going to sleep next to me. You're going to eat next to me. You're going to be around me 24/7. And that until you're ready to possibly be your own rabbi.
Yeah.
And
this is a Devil Wears Prada personal assistant.
Yes, everywhere, all the time. And so what has ended up happening is people see discipleship as like come and learn a very specific, very intentional head knowledge thing at a specific time, enough times, and then you become a rabbi, or then you become mature. And he was basically saying like, no, it's actually on the apprentice to stay close to the rabbi and to glean from him as much as being intentionally taught. And so what he said discipleship has turned from, and I even feel this tension in my own life, is it's turned from give me the secret knowledge to tell me how to implement what it looks like to be a Christian.
Yeah.
And so he uses three things. He uses three things, and the three things, I was going to let you sneeze.
I was trying to hold in that sneeze, but it just kept sitting there.
He uses three things. He's like, are you with Jesus? Are you walking or learning or gleaming with Jesus? And are you doing things like Jesus does? Yeah. So like, are you with Jesus? Do you look like Jesus? And are you doing Jesus type things? And he's like, that's a disciple. Now that would be the way that we would say like a Christian, you know what I mean? But practicing Christian. But what I love about that is like, it's something that starts to be able to identify that most of the time we are growing because of the access to information a lot faster than our implementation. And so what he was basically trying to say is like, you are not being defined by your ability to learn. You should be defined by your ability to imitate.
Yes. I remember listening to this part of the book because I listened to it on audiobook version.
I did too.
I did it on Spotify. By the way, if you don't know this, if you have Spotify Premium, you get one free book a month.
It's pretty sweet.
I've used that for a lot of things that I need to do or want to do.
Yep.
Anyway, I listened to this.
We're not sponsored by Spotify either.
No, we just like them a lot. I listened to this chapter and I was sort of confused. I heard him arguing about disciple is a noun, not a verb. But what he was saying just didn't click with me, or like what he was proposing that we should exclude from being a disciple and all that and whatever. It was so confusing to me until Trevor explained it, where he was, I think a good way to frame it is disciple is a role. It is not an action.
Yep.
So there are guitars. There are people playing guitars. And then there are guitarists.
Yep.
So when do you move from saying, oh, I do some woodworking in my garage to I'm a carpenter or to I'm a whatever? It's that sort of role is a commitment to be that thing reliably for other people, to be that thing in your own pursuit of that thing. So if you're a plumber, you can still learn about plumbing more than you know now, but you are like dedicating a big priority of your life to plumbing. Maybe that's just where your income comes from, but you'll buy the specialty tools and you'll like invest in continued education and like want to know more and bring in a bunch of experience with you by the end. And so what this is doing is turning it back on the student. Is if I'm a guitarist, I don't say, well, nobody's teaching me right now. It's like, no, I should have an insatiable thirst.
Do you have a guitar?
Yeah. We were talking about it earlier, and it was like, if my wife leaves for a weekend, I, like, no grown adult should have their other adult partner, whatever, leave for a weekend, come back, and you tell them, I wasn't fed that weekend. Could you not get up and like cook your own eggs or drive to Taco Bell? If content was the issue, can you not get that anywhere?
Yep.
Like,
and it really starts to change how you view. And I think this is what he was trying to say. We are really good at the church. Most churches, our church sometimes is even guilty of this, of getting people to say the phrase and to start the faith, but really bad at sometimes at putting this as like the goal.
Yeah.
So like when I read Matthew 28, 19 and 20, go out, therefore go out in the world and, baptize and make disciples. Making disciples sounds like convert, like get them on our team. Yeah. But actually what he's trying to say is disciple is a person that walks with Jesus, looks like Jesus, and does Jesus things.
Yeah. So for instance, there was an elder at a church that I served at one time. Because I feel like this question is, what does it look like to be a mature Christian? Yep. That's almost the same thing as what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus?
Yes.
So I was at a church. There's an elder who I thought was a faithful, mature Christian. And this is my evidence. It's not that he regularly attended church and tithed and did the church things. It's not that he believed all the right stuff. It's that against all social pressure, he would walk around the service, I think both services, because there were 2 services at that church, and walk up and down every aisle, every row, and shake everyone's hand that he could and look him in the eye. And that was an expression at church of his mature Christianity. But like he would do that to everybody in his life. He would be kind and friendly and outgoing and whatever. Not that those are the only Jesus qualities. But do that and offer to pray for people in public spaces and like use scripture in his own thought life and in his conversations with people outside of the church. And like, you could just tell that Jesus was a person he talked to all the time and it was rubbing off on him. And he therefore didn't care about his Christianity being an expression of him avoiding the traps that other Christians think you shouldn't step into and doing and saying the right things. It was like, I know Jesus. Like a comfortability and an inability to be offended.
Yeah. And I really think what struck me about this and why I thought it was worthy of our conversation, not that anything we've talked to at this point, I feel like it's just been more explanation of what the discussion needs to be about. But what struck me about this is that there is a tension, I think, in the time period that we're at, the current status of like what dominates our world is information. What dominates our world is the idea of learning information. And what is so easy sometimes to forget is worthy of sometimes even slowing down, the elimination of hurry,
Yep.
and actually taking the time to implement. I see this in the gym world all the time. People will be obsessed about figuring out the perfect way to diet, the perfect way to work out, the perfect way to do something, so much so that they're almost paralyzed by how much information they have, and they feel like they'll never get it right, and so they never start, or they can't maintain all these perfect things that they need to do, and so they never do anything. And so what ends up happening is, though they've gained all these awesome, amazing techniques and diet plans and meal plans and all this stuff, they never do any of it because they're overwhelmed by the amount of information that's out there. And I've just found that the simplest plan actually put into place consistently yields the best results at the beginning. And I think discipleship needs to be seen as the same way. It's like, I doubt any person that's listening to this can identify pretty quickly a place that they could be more patient, can identify a place where they could be more wise, can identify a place where they could implement purity in their life, can identify a place where they could go, you know what, I could be more kind in that place. Can identify a place where maybe there's a place where they could choose not to have joy, or they could choose to have joy, which is happiness that is not current but is promised. And I think there's just a part of me that just wonders why sometimes that is seen as less than, because maybe it's not heady, or it's not new, or it's not novel. And so I think what he's trying to get us back to is like, Jesus walked around at 3 miles an hour and collected 12 people that nobody wanted and was able to change the world in 3 years.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, we think we need stacks of, you know what I mean? We need all this stuff before we even start.
It's part of it is, there's so many aspects of it. But like one aspect is like quiet faithfulness. Jesus, among all the things that made him famous and infamous in his 3-year journey, continually went back to, I need to go be with my Father. I need to go spend time in prayer. That sort of thing. A quiet faithfulness to a spirituality that, with his speaking ability and his miracles and his whatever, he could have said, I don't have time for that thing, no matter how relatively good it is. I need to make time for these people who are validating me or whatever. But he led a life of quiet faithfulness. Reminds me of the story of Billy Graham, who lived a life of faithfulness and preaching and evangelism. And even though he had attained the status and the ability to draw crowds of tens of thousands of people, would still go back to his hotel room and do his prayers and do his prayers sounds not right, and pray and spend time with God and just like find his actual identity in life there. So much so that there was a reporter who snuck into his hotel room one night and laid under his bed and waited for like the secret life of Billy Graham to come out. And it didn't. It was just hours of him praying, and this reporter under the bed like, am I just wasting all my time? Am I whatever? And so like this quiet faithfulness kind of flies in the face of church attendance and church whatever, which is all good. Don't hear us saying something we're not saying. So don't hear us saying that church attendance is bad. No. But being a disciple of Jesus is being a role.
Well, and if you think about it, if you're trying to implement this all week and you're struggling to figure it out and you're fighting to figure out the best ways to do things, you come back to a community of people that hopefully are doing the same things, and you celebrate and you walk through the grace that is if you failed, and you walk through the joy of the opportunity, the full life that's been there. And then on top of that, you lift up others that maybe need help or encourage them. And I think that's part of this too, is like, I think you miss out on the fullness of what it means to be a disciple. There's just a lack of understanding. One of the things that I wish I would have said at our Easter service this last week is that, a lot of times, often we think of salvation as something, or a resurrection as something that has to happen when we die. And I think what Jesus did was he died so that heaven could come right now, immediately into your life. And I don't think you experience heaven without implementing. I don't think you get to walk in the full resurrection without implementing.
What we're saying is there is heaven. There is presence with God in eternity. But if you got to eternity and acted like you do now, you'd be fine to wait another 50 years. I don't know that you understood it in the first place. So what we're saying is like the way of Jesus is being a citizen of the kingdom of God now, is being heavenly, being in the presence of God right now, where the outcasts are brought in and the high are brought low and the low are brought high, and community has no bars of race or gender or social status. Honestly, that's the biggest one. Social
status is
socioeconomic class, where like the poorer somebody looks or smells or dresses, the less you want to make eye contact. That's something that Jesus wants to change in you and me and whoever's listening, a lot more than, well, they only came to church 3 times this month instead of all 4. Like, that's also a good thing. But if church is a task to check off so God won't be mad at you, that's not fulfilling the call of being a disciple. Like church would be if you showed up because you know there are 40 people that you love whose stories are in the middle of crisis or blessing, and you want to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn and celebrate with those who celebrate. And like if it's a life of community of the body of Christ, go and be fulfilled, and that's part of the Jesus way. But if it's like, I want to make God not mad at me because I think he would be mad at me just because of who I am or because of what I've done this week, then like you're not accomplishing anything other than hopefully hearing from Jesus again to correct you on that.
And I think that's the other side of the coin is like, it's not only a resurrection to heaven, it's a resurrection out of hell or out of Hades, out of darkness. And so if you're in a really dark place, guess what? Discipling or following or implementing or imitating Jesus things into your life is the fastest way to resurrection. It's the fastest way to healing. It's the fastest way to hope. And that doesn't mean your circumstances change. It doesn't mean those things are immediately fixed. But Jesus constantly ran up against hard things, suffering and difficulty and loss and frustration and ignorance. And he always figured out a way to be kind and compassionate and love and bring light, not letting the darkness around him define him, but rising above it and actually changing and shining in that. And so when I hear disciple, I don't hear, somebody that's passive or like just like letting the world, just kind of beat them up and they're like the pillow that just keeps getting smashed or laid on. I actually see something that pushes back darkness, that doesn't allow this world to define their eternal, impact or victory. And so I guess what I loved about what John was saying in the book was like, this is what you're looking for. If you've been a Christian for a really long time and you keep waiting for the right piece of advice to show up so that the key somehow will now be, changed in your understanding so that now the gateway to whatever you think is utopia on the other side, he's like, no, like, how about you simply implement the things that you've learned about Jesus at the simplest level in every area of your life at all times as much as possible. Not because you feel condemned if you don't, but because you are excited for what could happen if you did. Mm-hmm. You're excited the impact that could happen if you did.
I had opened my Bible up over here to a couple places where disciple is mentioned and Jesus talks about what disciple is. But honestly, as you were talking about all that, it reminded me of, I think he mentioned this in the book. It's been a while since I read that part of it, but the yoke part of, was it end of Matthew 11? Mm-hmm. Where he's talking about what a yoke is, and like the actual animal farming thing in their day is a yoke is like a shoulder neck mount thing that joins
two pairs of oxen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that joins 2 oxen together. So
think of it like a W, almost like, or an M. That you would sit on one side, and then the thing would sit right next to you.
I wanted to say M for Messiah, but the first M that came to mind was the Golden Arches.
Yep.
M for McDonald's.
M for sorry.
So it's a thing that joins 2 oxen together, and you've talked about this before, and I think he talked about it, how the work is, or that the effort is multiplied beyond what the individual strength of the. They also said this was a common way to talk about being a disciple of a rabbi. You are yoked to your rabbi. So Jesus isn't saying yoke as a totally new thing. He's saying yoke as in, compared to all these other rabbis, my
Yep.
My tutelage, my imitation of me is easy and my burden is light. And take my yoke upon you and I'll give you rest and whatever. But that yoke imagery is talking about, like what you said, following him around and doing the work step in step, like side by side the whole time. So being a disciple is having a commitment to walk step by step with Jesus, even if you mess up at it.
Yes.
Of course, all the disciples messed up a bunch.
And that's why you're yoked to him, because he will catch you. He will be there.
Yes.
He's there to take on the load. Like, it's not just yours to carry. And here's the thing, like, I don't want to make this like uber, overly complicated. I want to make this as simple as possible. Like if you're a person listening to this and you're like, Trevor, that's all good, but like, what does this really look like? Like, I'm genuinely like take one fruit of the Spirit, one of them. I don't care which one it is, whichever one you struggle with, fine. Whichever one you think you're good at, and just try to do that all day. Like, legitimately just imitate the Spirit of God in the heart of Christ and just try to do it. And what I mean by that is, like, just try kindness. Like, no matter what happens, try to be kind all day. And I know that sounds like a goody two shoes or whatever you want to call it. Like, you're trying to just make some mystical daddy happy. But in some ways, like, what if that stops just being imitation at some point and that starts to be your identity? Because that's ultimately where the word Christian came from, is little Christ. It was actually supposed to be an insult in Acts. In one of the cities, they called him little Christ, and that's where we got the word Christian. And then the Christians took it on because they loved it.
Yeah.
I think disciples,
like, please, I wish.
Yes, I think disciples mentioned like over 200 times. Christians only mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. And so, like, it's not a widely used term, but they loved it so much because they're like, yeah, if you think we're like little Christ, we'll take that all day. Yeah. That sounds awesome. But I think for us, we're so worried that we're going to be unauthentic, or it's not, we're not really able to do that all the time. It's like, yeah, sure, no one's kind all the time, but if you use the excuse that I'm not going to be perfect as a reason not to try, like, what are we talking about? Like, I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, try, and maybe, guess what? You might get a little better. And like, who doesn't want a little more kindness in their life? Like,
yeah, it's probably true that you can't be perfectly kind. And it's probably true that you aren't naturally, authentically 100% kind. But it can be true that Jesus is teaching you to be kind. And that's a good answer and a good thing to carry around with you.
And if it's discipleship.
Being a disciple is behavior imitation. And also thinking pattern and worldview and everything else.
You want the kindness to come from the right place, not just to be seen as kind. I get that. You want it to flow from the kindness of God into the person you're being kind to. Totally. But that, again, is spending time with God, feeling the kindness flow into your life, and then walking in the same kindness you've received in the yoke of being with him. And then that yoke allows you to be kind to others because that's what's flowing into your life. And
what this means is, actually, I think a really applicable passage is 1 Corinthians 1, which I reference, I think, every single podcast.
That's okay. They're going to read it now.
Before some of the parts, especially Courtney, this is for you. Before some of the parts I reference all the time, Paul talks about this church at Corinth and how it's growing, but there are all these leaders and factions and people. And he's talking about, some of you say, I follow, which, let me pull up Matthew chapter 4, verse 18. Jesus walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. And then there's another James and John, and called them with the same follow me thing. Anyway, so follow me is a discipleship term.
Yep.
And so 1 Corinthians, all these different people in the church are like, well, I follow Apollos. I follow Paul. Jesus in Matthew 28 doesn't call you to go make disciples of yourself. Now, Paul does say, follow me as I follow Christ. But the end goal is to be a disciple of Jesus, and maybe Paul is the stepping stone or the closest and best example of that to you. Somebody you can follow who can be corrected by Jesus.
Yep.
But so with all that put in place, it's really weird to say, well, my rabbi, I'm a disciple of Jesus, and Paul didn't feed me. Paul didn't give me everything I was hoping I would get today. and it's been a month and I haven't heard anything that convicting from Paul, well, he's not like, he shouldn't be your rabbi.
So let me ask you this, Ryan. You just mentioned guitar or drums.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What if someone came to you and you gave them all the knowledge that you possibly could about drums and guitar, but they never played the instrument and they got mad at you because they weren't getting good when they first tried?
That's a hypothetical the way you said it, but that is a reality for half the students I teach.
Okay,
and
so
in all venues, but it's maybe we'll play it when we're together, but then they show up the week after
and they
haven't
didn't practice once,
and they come up and say, "I feel like I'm not learning anything." Well,
That's what I'm getting to.
That's okay. As a music teacher, it's super frustrating, and at the same time, that is exclusively what I did as a kid to get to where I am today.
This is why this hit me.
But hey, the reason I'm not going to say I'm the best drummer in the world, but the reason I got as good as I am now to where other people want me to teach them this skill to the depth that I know this skill is not because I practiced a lot when my teachers told me to, but it's because I practiced the skill of drumming by performing a lot.
Yep.
So instead of a lot of practice hours by myself, I would just say yes to every opportunity. I do not advise this. Please don't do what I did. But like junior year of high school, I was in marching band, jazz band, concert band, played drums for the musical, played drums for the choir and orchestra concert, so they didn't have to hire a drummer.
Yep.
Every Sunday at my church, every Wednesday at my church, 3 or 4 summer camps at my church camp, and a band on the side and all this stuff, so that even though I wasn't practicing the lessons that my teachers taught me, I was in the practice of playing the drums all the time.
Yeah, but you were imitating songs all the time.
Yeah.
You were playing songs all the time.
And so I didn't get better without practice, even though I didn't solo practice a lot.
And I guess this is what I'm getting to is like, this is what I feel like sometimes we fall into if we're not careful, is we go to guitar lessons once a week and we don't practice it ever. And then we do that for months and months and months. And we make our way through the practice book. But we never implemented any of the stuff outside of one practice a week.
Yeah.
And then we go, I'm not being discipled. And in my mind, I'm going, this is where the breakdown is.
You are not a disciple.
You're not discipling. You are a noun, not a verb.
That's what I'm trying to say. You are not a disciple in that moment because you're taking disciple lessons.
Yep.
You're hopefully meeting with Jesus, but usually if you're like not getting much out of it, you're probably not deep in prayer all the time either. You're usually getting Jesus mediated to you through a person once a week.
Yeah.
And then you walk away 3 or 4 months later saying, I don't think Jesus is what I'm looking for. I don't think Jesus is enough when you haven't practiced Jesus.
This is my thought process around this, and not to take this illustration too far because everything breaks down, but if a person was imitating some of the lessons they were learning and they were taking them, putting them in the real world, guess what happens? They're successful in some things, and they find those things to be really easy. Most of the time, if it's guitar, one hand works better than the other.
Yeah.
The rhythm hand's great, or the chord hand's just funky, or the chord hand's great, but they can't find any rhythm on the right hand, right? Or drum, it's like one beat is just easier than the other, and they can't break out of that beat, and so they're stuck in it forever. But then also they come back with things to learn and work on.
Yes.
Where if they sit at the feet of the rabbi this 1 month and they go, hey, I tried this thing 3 times this week and I couldn't get it right once.
The difference between a student who's practiced and a student who hasn't, and I'm using this simultaneously for music but also for Jesus.
Yes.
Is a student who hasn't practiced will say, what was I supposed to do again? Months in a row. And will say, hey, I forgot how to do this. A student who has practiced will say, hey, I really tried this and it was great and I got way better. Or, hey, I really tried this and I have some questions about it. I was confused when I was doing this. That is a great Jesus question.
That is a great Jesus question. Those are the things.
Jesus, how'd you have all these patience and this calm in the face of people crucifying
And
you?
that's my one of my favorite things to happen at church is when someone comes up and they're like, hey, I've been serving in da-da-da, and these kids have been asking these questions. Or I am trying to help my kids figure this out at home, and I'm stuck on how to teach them da 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 da. Or I have this coworker that has these questions and I didn't know exactly what to say. And I've been friends with them for a long time, so they trust me, but I'm trying to help. Like I'm like, yes, like bring those questions on. Like I'm like, let's do this. Rather than someone coming up and going like, where's the secret knowledge that you've been holding back from telling me?
And honestly, it is our infotainment culture. That's a made up word that I've heard before. Where it's
Pretty
like
sure that other word was made up too. But
you feel better about entertainment that is informational. But the thing you're looking for is the entertainment dopamine.
Yeah.
So that is the reason why half the things I watch on YouTube are like very entertaining, informational things. They're like a Comedy Central.
I feel better about it because I'm learning something.
Or they're a coffee person, like YouTube channel talking about something, but it's crazy. But it like could help me maybe in making coffee.
Oh, mine is like bush camping. Like I know how to survive in the wild. I'm never gonna go in the wild and take a horse, take my like extra shoestrings and like a tarp and whatever and survive for 3 days.
Yeah.
But I love learning information about that. And you know,
and it's such a fun thing to do that. But when it's Jesus and that's not what he's called you to do, and you do that, and then you say, I'm just not getting much out of it. Or the biggest thing with I'm not feeling fed is I'm not feeling the dopamine of new Bible information.
Yep.
Or new theological understanding God information.
Stuck.
Yes.
I feel stuck. And it's like, I want to say, you know why you're stuck? Because you're not moving. You're not moving. You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
You're not implementing any of this stuff. You're not actually going out and being a disciple. You're looking for more information so that you feel good about sitting at the desk a little longer.
And in all of these things where it's a noun, it's a role, it's a commitment to a thing, information has its place. It's not evil.
No.
But we have infinite information at our fingertips.
Ever want.
Maybe there's stuff that humans don't know, but the amount of stuff that humans do know that you know is infinitesimally small.
I love the quotes that older people will say is, I've forgotten more than you know.
Yeah.
Like that's what older people will say. They're like, I've forgotten more than you know. And you're like, it's probably true.
So like, it's a lot of times when people say, I'm not feeling fed, some of it is information. And to be frank, you can find information, even good faith Bible information, like do a little bit to dig through some of the weeds and some of the muck, ask somebody you trust how to find some good Bible information, and you can do a good Bible study on your own if information's what you're after. And that's a good thing to want, but it's not the only thing. In fact, just information without practice is good diet without exercise.
Absolutely.
Like how much good food can you eat? How much, like, can you eat bathtubs of broccoli and lose weight? No, because you ate too much.
I mean,
you didn't do anything after you ate it.
The trouble really is too. It's like, what are you putting the fuel in to do?
Yeah.
Like if you're eating perfect health and your body's really healthy, that's great. But like all you did is sit at home. Like what's the impact of that?
Yeah.
Like that's great. But like you didn't do anything with this perfect body that you fed. And I think that's my holdup here is like, I really want people to, and that's what I think hit me the most when I was listening to this chapter and listening to John talk was like the concept of like people really thinking that Jesus wants you to learn more. And when I'm like, no, I really think Jesus wanted you to lean in with love and do more. Like at the amount of things, if you go in and look at what Jesus commands you to do, it's almost all action, not knowledge. It's not like, ooh, go learn these new things. It's like, go and learn this. I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Yeah. Actually, one of his attacks on the Pharisees that I remember the most clearly is him getting mad at them about a loophole, which is special, incredible knowledge to keep you from having to act.
Yep.
So it was the loophole of you're committing your money to the temple and you're doing it being paid by the temple so that you won't have to feel the financial and like time pressure of taking care of your aging parents. Sorry, parents, I can't take care of you. I've given it all to the Lord. The Lord's not happy about it. He'd rather you take it back, honestly.
He'd rather you take care of your parents.
That's one of the big Jesus fights against the Pharisees. It's like you found all these loopholes out of doing the actions that God wants, doing the actions that are representative of the kingdom of heaven,
Oh, yeah.
of the kingdom of where God is. And you've done those things in the name of obeying the letter of the law.
Yep.
Not saying that obeying the law is not good, but saying that like you think that you're, what is that phrase? Malevolent obedience, where it's like somebody's, I can't think of the best definition for this, but
what we've talked about a lot is like when you have to break love to keep the law, you broke the law.
Yeah.
And when you bend or see how love needs to intercede, the law becomes something that was intended to boost or grow, bring more love out of, not necessarily squelch or at least break love. I'll end with this because I know we've had a great discussion. And if there's any questions or more things that we need to do around too, we can. And as we're reading through this book, I'm sure I'll bring up other topics because the thing is just so well written. But Mark Twain has a famous quote, and I've even said it on here before, but it's worth keeping in the back of your mind. It's not the things in the Bible that I do not understand that keep me up at night. It's the simple truths that I know and do not do.
Yeah.
And the simple truth is love God and love others is really that simple. That's what it looks like to imitate Jesus and the triune God. And so if you think there's some secret understanding of what love is that can get you out of it being hard or sacrificial or difficult, be careful. Because like love demands the cross level of sacrifice. And like when you don't see it that way, you're probably just trying to find a scapegoat of the reason not to be able to do that. On the altar of knowledge.
People of all nationalities, of all variations of belief in Jesus and obedience to Jesus and allegiance to Jesus, there's going to be people from all those groups in heaven, in eternity with you. Who would it be awkward for you to be with in heaven right now? And why is it awkward? And why are you letting it remain that way? Is it awkward because you secretly hate them or don't think they deserve heaven or whatever? Is it awkward because there's some like grudge or gripe that you've left unresolved, unremedied?
Because you don't look like Jesus right now.
Yeah.
You're just, that's called recognizing your growth and being a disciple. Well, this has been awesome. I like always, leave a like or share with somebody, or if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and do that. Leave a review in any of the places you listen to on the podcast. Shoot a comment if you found this encouraging or helpful. It always is nice for us to look back and see that that's there. If you have any questions, you can send an email to Ryan at Kingsway.
Ryan at kingswaymo.com.
Yep. And as always, really appreciate you guys. The views have gone up a little bit. We're noticing that some people are watching, and we hope that this is encouraging to you and it's a part of a discussion that maybe can happen inside your marriage or with your friends or even a small group. So
hope this is enough information to help you feel fed this week.
Yeah. Hopefully you go out there and you actually be a noun, a disciple, hold the title. So, well, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you later.
See you.